Sorry for the interruption. My mom called on the house phone. I had to talk with her for a moment. Let's finish up at Cowboy Kind of Love by Donna Grant. So far, we know that Jace is still in love with Taryn, and Taryn is on the run, or is she? We're going to find out right now, so stay tuned on page 43 right here. How many times had he had imaginary conversations with her where he told her how hurt he was, how he missed her, how furious he was that she still hadn't told him goodbye to his face, that he still loved her. Jace fisted his hands, arguing with himself over what to do. There was pros and cons to both options. The more he sat here and thought about Taryn being back in Clearview without talking to him, the angrier he became. And yet he was thinking of staying in his truck instead of talking to her. F that. He shut off the engine and climbed out. Taryn owed him an explanation, and if by some chance it wasn't her, well then Chase would go straight to his therapist. As he walked toward the entrance, he wasn't sure if he wanted the woman inside to be her or not. If it was, then he might finally get some answers to many questions that had formed over the years. If it wasn't her, then maybe he would hire Cash and find her once and for all. He needed closure, both mentally and emotionally. His therapist had told him exactly that when Taryn first left, but he hadn't been ready to consider it. Now he was. He wanted to move on with his life, and he couldn't do that either until he had the closure that she hadn't given him. He pulled open the door to the restaurant and walked inside. Jace removed the sunglasses and paused beside the hostess as she greeted him. Letting his eyes adjust to the dimness of the interior, he hung his sunglasses on his neck and off his shirt and ignored the hostess as he scanned the occupants, and his gaze landed on Taryn. She sat facing the door, her head lowered as she looked at the menu. "Sir?" He blinked and looked at the petite brunette staring back at him unexpectedly. "I'm meeting someone," he answered the hostess. Then he pointed to Taryn. "She's right over there." Jace walked toward Taryn, his heart beating rapidly. All sorts of things ran through his head. Her thick hair was much longer now. The dark strands were falling over to one side as she leaned her head into her hand and slid her fingers through her curls. This was the first time he got a look at her face in years. The sight was like being kicked by a horse. He halted, unable to move. He'd seen her so many times in his dreams, but looking at her now was like seeing her for the first time all over again. She had taken his breath away back then, and doing it again now. Her oval face had delicate features, but her eyes were large and slanted slightly upward in the corners. Dark brows arched over the beautiful green orbs, the color the most unusual thing he ever seen. There were no words to describe it. Her eyes had been the first thing he noticed about her all those years ago. The second was her lips, wide, full, and utterly sensual. With just a smile, she could have had him on his knees, even today. But those were only a few other assets. The high cheekbones and hourglass figure that made his mouth water, and a laugh that could make anyone smile, completed the package. She was just stunning. The kind of striking that caused people to stop and stare because they weren't sure that she was real. That kind of beauty generally went to someone else's head, but not Taryn. She could have had any man she wanted. For a brief time she'd chosen him. Those 2 years had been the best years of Jace's life. They had made a great team, or at least he thought they had, and the boom boom, well, it had been mind-blowing. He'd fallen head over heels for her in just a few days. Hell, he loved her first sight. Jace had even known almost immediately that he wanted her in his life forever. Suddenly, Taryn looked up from the menu. The instant their eyes met, she stilled, surprise registering as if she hadn't been prepared for this moment. She straightened slowly, her arm falling to the table as her lips parted in shock. Jace watched. Disbelief and astonishment crossed her features, one emotion at a time. She slowly lowered the menu. The hair fell back into place as she licked her lips, a nervous gesture he picked up on early in their relationship. She glanced away and took a drink of the water that had been placed on the table. Then she slid her gaze back to him. "Jace?" A shudder went through him at the sound of his name on her lips once again. He wasn't sure about approaching her was a good idea. He realized he wasn't prepared for any of it, no matter what he had told himself. Not the sight of her, not the reaction to seeing him, and not the smooth sound of her voice. Not the fierce, undesirable desire that was still stirred within him. He'd been raised to be a gentleman, but all of that went out the window as the pain of the last few years welled up inside of him. He wanted to shout at her, to release all his fury he held inside for so long. He wanted to shake her, to kiss her, to hold her against him, and feel her soft curves as he tasted her sweet lips. It surprised him how he could hold on to so much anger and passion for the same person. The two emotions swirled around each other, twining together until he couldn't tell one from the other. But the one thing he knew for certain was that she still had the ability to make him crave her as no one else could. He walked the rest of the way to the table and slid into the booth without asking if she was okay. He didn't take his hat off and even offer a smile. The pain pushed past desire. Then, "Where have you been?" he demanded. Her eyes lowered to the table, showing him long lashes that used to tickle his cheek as she rested her hand on his shoulder. "I know you're angry." "You don't know a damn thing," he said over her. "You left in the middle of the night and you thought a quick text was enough." "I know." She took a deep breath and looked up at him. "And I'm sorry." He shook his head. "You don't get to say that without an explanation." She began. She glanced toward the door of the restaurant. She paused, her face going pale. She shifted uncomfortably. "Can we do this another time?" "I've been waiting years for answer. I'm not going anywhere." He wanted to look over his shoulder to see what kind of caused that discomfort, but he wasn't going to take his eyes from her. The fact that she was too obviously upset caused him to want to protect her, which only ticked him off even more. But he wasn't entirely sure that she wasn't playing him. She cut her eyes to the door again, then lowered her voice. "Please." He sat back and put one arm on the back of the booth. "No." "Jace, go," she urged. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw someone approaching. He looked over to find a man in a suit. Jace gave him the once-over, noting that the man's impeccable features. He was good-looking, and the stranger knew it. That didn't upset Jace, though, and he was ticked because the man was there to see Taryn. "Hello," the stranger said to Taryn, shooting her a smile. "I didn't know we were having company." "We aren't," she said. She looked pointedly at Jace. Jace was about to tell them that he was staying, but a man could only take so much abuse before he reached his limit, and he was far past his. Without a word, he rose from the table. He looked at the man in the eye and gave him a nod, then walked out of the building to his truck. Once inside, he turned up the music and pointed the vehicle toward his house. The need for alcohol was too strong to resist. Taryn was still in shock at seeing Jace at the restaurant. She wanted to call him back. She wanted to ask him to wait so she could tell him everything he wanted to know, but she didn't. She couldn't believe he found her. Actually, that wasn't true. She hadn't exactly hidden when she came to town. A part of her had wanted him to find her. It had been a beautiful daydream, one that she clearly had every day, the chance to return to Clearview and find Jace and have him offer to rescue her without wanting to know all the details of what happened, him stating his love. But the reality was much, much different, and it had hit her like a freight train when she found Jace standing before her. She had nearly wept at the sight of him. Somehow he was more handsome than ever. How was that possible? She let her eyes run over his strong jaw, wide lips, and hard body. She even knew firsthand all those lean muscles. But then, when he demanded answers, and she hated him for it. Hated him because she couldn't give him what he wanted. Seeing him had her hurting all over again, and there was no denying the anger and the pain in his hazel eyes. When he sat down, she fought the urge to reach out and tuck his golden blonde hair behind his ears where he poked out of his Stetson. He needed a haircut. He always put that off, and seeing it now reminded her of the many times she had trimmed his hair for him. He loved having his hair cut, and she loved doing it. "Is there a problem?" Taryn stared at the deep voice behind her. She had forgotten all about the meeting. She looked into the man's deep brown eyes and shook her head. "Not at all." "I'm Jerome," he said. He motioned to the booth. Taryn nodded for him to sit down. "This is a very public place." "Exactly. Transactions like ours are usually done here, which makes it perfect." She sat back, instantly not liking Jerome. Maybe it was the way he spoke, or they acted as if they were above the law, or perhaps it was the way he stared at her. Taryn had gotten used to the looks from men at an early age, but some made her skin crawl, and Jerome was such a man. "I don't like this." He smiled through his eyes that didn't reach. Who was that man?" "No one. I want to know his name." She narrowed her eyes at him. "It's none of your business. I determine what's my business or not, and he's certainly my business the way he looked after you." Taryn wasn't going to listen to this anymore. She might be doing a trial run for Big Pete, but she could convince him to give her another try, hopefully, maybe. Crap! She was in so deep that she could no longer determine which way was up. That's how her brother and had gotten killed. If she wasn't careful, she'd soon follow in his footsteps, and that simply could not happen. Tarrant met Jerome's dark eyes and let an anger surface enough for him to see. I don't give a rat's butt who you think you are. I won't conduct business here, and if you think you're going to come in here and tell me what to do, you got another thing coming. Instead of lashing out, he laughed and sat back, mimicking Jace's pose with his arm along the back of the booth. Pete told me you had spirit. Now I understand what he was referring to, and I'm intrigued. How much? Excuse me? She asked, taken back. How much do you want to be mine? Tarrant shook her head in astonishment, and more than just a little indignation. Who the hell do you think you are? I'm not property to be bought. I'm willing to pay whatever you want to be mine, he said, his gaze intensified. I can give you anything and take you anywhere you desire. Anything you wish, just give me a figure. She was ready to tell him to kiss off when she realized that his proposition was better than the one she was given by Big Pete. It would only get her out of the hole that she was currently finding herself in, but it wasn't just money. Boyd would kill her sister if she didn't return on time. Even for an instant she thought about Jerome that might be able to help her with Boyd. She'd take him up on his offer. The fact that she was putting herself in such a position to be in Pete's debt to do whatever he wanted, sexual or otherwise, for an unspecified period of time was just more than enough. All she had to do was trade one idiot for another. And Jerome wasn't any better than Pete or Boyd. I'm not interested, she replied. A smile broke over Jerome's face. But you considered it. I know you did. So what? She asked with a shrug. He leaned forward and put his arm on the table. Why are you working for Pete? Whatever you went to him for, I can get you. I need $500,000. Done, Jerome said without blinking. Tarrant laughed and rubbed her forehead. I have a debt to repay. I assumed. People don't just ask for that kind of money unless it's important. I can write you a check right now. Come with me. I'll wipe away anything from your past that's hounding you. You've never been able to do that? The money is only a portion of my debt. What's the rest? Tarrant stared at him, refusing to speak. Finally, Jerome lifted his hands. All right, if you don't want to tell me, that's fine. I've got connections. Tarrant, I can untangle you from whatever mess you're in. The more he spoke, the more she thought he might be able to do it. And while Jerome still wasn't her best option, he was someone other than Pete who made her gag. She only had gone to Pete because there hadn't been anyone else, and now she had options. While she didn't know much about anything regarding Jerome, at least he seemed like a better choice. The confidence with which he spoke told her that he was used to negotiating. He might be able to go up against Boyd and ensure that she and Peyton were able to get away. If Tarrant played her cards right, she might be able to make sure Peyton didn't get involved in whatever agreement she made with Jerome. Tarrant hadn't been sure that Pete would even respond, so she let out a mention of Peyton or Boyd in discussion with him. Tell me who it is, Jerome urged. There isn't anything you can say that will make me retract my offer, I promise. Boyd Walters. Jerome's face paled. He slid from the booth and stood to button his jacket. As beads of his sweat dotted his forehead, he glanced around as if he was looking for someone. Forget you know my name. I don't want anything to do with you. Our conversation never happened, and I never made any sort of offer to you. But you just said. That was before you mentioned that name. Not to mention she hadn't made... And just like that, her other option was gone. Not to mention that she hadn't made the sale for Pete. Dang it, Tarrant mumbled to herself. She blew out a breath as the waitress walked up. She needed to eat, and Brandy's food was inedible. Plus, she wasn't all sure that Jace wasn't waiting in the parking lot for her. She couldn't face him again, not now at least. After she placed her order, Tarrant dropped her head into her hands, elbows at the table. She had known that coming back to Clearview was a mistake, but she had been grasping at straws, and that's what desperate people did. However had she imagined things would work out as she wanted, and how the hell did she think she'd come back to town and not run into Jace? Please, she whispered to whatever higher power might be listening, I'm tired and scared, and I don't know what else to do now. Her last few years had been hell, and it didn't look like things were going to get any better. She raised her head, blinked rapidly to quell tears that threatened. Thankfully, they retreated. She feared as if she gave in and let them come again, they wouldn't stop. She was tipping into an abyss that threatened to eat her whole, and now she had nothing and no one to hold on to. Not true. There's someone you can turn to. Tarrant refused to think of Jace. He was furious with her, and for good reason. He was the type of man who was a natural hero, the kind who always did the right thing, who set aside their own wants and needs to help the ones they loved. He had come into her life at a time when she needed him. He swept her off her feet and loved her unconditionally, gave her that kind of love that everyone dreamed of. She had that for 2 blissful years. She'd been in his arms of this man who sheltered her, loved her, and adored her. And in one horrible night, it had all gone away. Next paperclip. She should leave tonight, not return to the hotel to gather a few more meager items from where she had been there, and she would head back to the Fort Worth and deal with what consequences of not having the money. She'd rather die than have Jace and his friends killed because of her. This was her family problems, no one else's. "If you leave, I'll track you," Jace said, as he got to his feet, walked toward her. "I know that look on your face. You regret telling me anything, but know this, I lost you once, and I'm not going to do it a second time." Taryn wanted to scream, to hit something. There was no good choice here. If she was smart, stronger, she might have done things differently with Jerome and even Big Pete, but she screwed that up royally. Looking up and seeing Jace standing there had given her such hope that she flung herself at him. Jace was the one and only who had never let her down. He'd been steady and true as the giant live oak she'd played on from a child in front of her house. She instinctively knew that Jace was the answer. Even now, knowing that he could die, she understood that he was the best chance of freedom, yet she couldn't allow him to do it. The time he spent with a prisoner of war left scars on his body and soul that would never heal. When they first met, he told her that he was broken, but all she found was a gentle, kind, adoring man who showed her exactly what it was like to be loved unconditionally. He deserved better than her, and his fate was going to lead him to this. "Did you hear me?" Jace said. He closed the distance between them. "I'll follow you. I know the license plates of your car between Ryan and the chief of police and Danny as the sheriff. There's nowhere that you can go that I won't find you." Her heart raced, having him near. She stared into his hazel eyes and felt even more tears threaten as that love reflected there. She didn't deserve Jace. The last thing he needed was more upheaval in his life. He had already lost so much of himself in the military. The fact that he was alive and the hail spoke to the fighting spirit within him. Oh, what a cowboy, what a man. Not to give up, not to walk away, not to throw in the towel, and still love her, even when he didn't have all the answers to the many questions that she left behind. How amazing. Page 94. All those years ago, Taryn left because a drug dealer forced her family to leave in order to pay off her father's debt. Her father and brother are now dead, killed by the drug dealer, but the people who took them still have Taryn's younger sister. Taryn's in town to get $500,000 off to pay her family's debt and try to free Peyton and herself, Jace explained. "F me," Cooper murmured. That Ryan then said, "Tell me that license plate and I'll get to my deputies immediately." Jace quickly rattled off the numbers and letters, and his gut was twisting. He knew Taryn wasn't coming back. She had said what and done all the things, but he knew her too well. Once she realized that he planned to put himself in the middle of the situation, her body language immediately told him that she wanted to do what she always did with those that she loved. She wanted to protect. "We're heading out now," Cooper said, and disconnected. So she's obviously left again. But Jace is not going to let her leave. But she thinks that she's protecting Jace and anybody that Jace loves by leaving. When in all actuality, Jace is now on the hunt for her to not let her escape their love once again. Oh, this man is just too much. This is a great story. And in the end, is it really her sister's choice to be, it's not her sister's choice to be held captive by Boyd, or is it? With that burning question, I'm going to leave you sitting on the edge of your seat and conclude our reading tonight with that. And thank you for tuning in. And thank you for letting me share this book with you. This book rating, I usually don't like books like this. And the reason being the violence and all that stuff. But it reminds me a little bit of Rip and Beth from Yellowstone. Just a little bit. Speaking of which, I'm ready for Yellowstone to return, which I hear is June 20th. I can't wait for that. But back to the rating before everybody's like, now enough of that. Tell us the rating and should we read this book? The rating of the book, I'm going to say, is a strong 7. One of those that pulls you in, makes you want to know what happens next, and definitely is a page turner. Once you start going and you go, okay, is she going to get out of this? Is he going to get her the money? Is he going to get killed? Is she going to get killed? Is her sister going to get killed? You'll want to know the answers to these questions. 7 for the rating. Thank you for tuning in, and I'll hope to see you tomorrow night. God bless. Stay safe, stay well. Keep your social distance still. Wash your hands when you can't. Use your hand sanitizer when you need to. If you have not been vaccinated, wear your mask. If you have, when you need to, wear your mask in big crowds. Love all of you, and may you have a better tomorrow.